old world
Need something more powerful than any of us.
in Avengers Age of Ultron, the Avengers have to deal with the issue of there being a global entity.
It's a different playing field. We're dealing with these situations on a kind of global level.
As much as it could be, it's a much bigger film than the first Avengers, just visually where we're going.
We're in Italy. It's incredibly cold and rainy and foggy, and we love it.
New York's home to the Avengers Tower, which is massive.
Very enthusiastic fans. They're very welcoming, letting us take over their streets for a few days.
Today, the Avengers finds himself at Dover Castle, continuing the world tour.
Welcome to South Africa, Avengers!
We want to look at the Avengers, see the effect they have on the whole world, for them to come to places like Johannesburg and take with them the inevitable trouble that follows them. How is that going to affect their perception of each other and the world's perception of them?
You want to protect the world, but you don't want it to change.
We've gone to far more locations than we have ever before and kind of covered more ground, and so aesthetically, everything has just been dialed up.
Avengers, time to work for a living.
Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. So everybody freaked out a little bit yesterday when Joss Whedon said there's no post-credit scene in Avengers Age of Ultron. So I want to explain what he meant when he said that and talk about my top 10 Marvel post-credit scenes just from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. What Joss Whedon said is that there is no after the credits scene, but there are scenes at the end of the movie that will set up the next Phase 3 movies, most notably Captain America, Civil War. That's a really important one for next year because it's almost an Avengers film by itself. There's Thor 3 Ragnarok, which is kind of like Thor's version of Winter Soldier. And then there's Ant-Man, although I'm not expecting to see a whole lot of Ant-Man stuff. Right now, it's like Marvel's stepchild. It's kind of sitting in the corner. Don't worry, I'll do more Ant-Man videos after Age of Ultron comes out. You also have to remember, they could always change their mind. Sometimes what they'll do is they won't put post-credit scenes on like critic screenings or like the very first overseas screenings. And then they'll add them later once the movie's out like everywhere. That's kind of what happened when Guardians of the Galaxy came out. Like most of the critics that went to see it were like, there's no post-credit scene. But Marvel and Disney had just omitted it from all those early screenings. They didn't add it until it was in wide release. So worst case scenario, all those end credit scenes just happen before the end credits. We can get into like post-credit spoilers and stuff like that when the movie comes out. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So top 10 Marvel post-credit scenes, starting with number 10, Science Bros counseling at the end of Iron Man 3. The movie itself was kind of an outlier in terms of Avengers films, just because it came after the first Avengers film, so everyone was expecting this really big, grand spectacle, and it ended up being this deep dive into Tony Stark. But the Science Bros at the end of the film, I feel like was a perfect addition. It was a much more personal Marvel film in general, and Science Bros is just a much more personal thing. Just a funny twist on the idea of Banner being a doctor, and the two of them being in close contact, like being friends while the timeline of all these movies is going along, like in the background. Like they have each other on speed dial or something. Mark Ruffalo's actually said in interviews that there's a whole bunch of Science Bros in Age of Ultron. So if you guys really like the moments with those two characters together, you're really gonna have some fun. On to number 9, Thor's hammer at the end of Iron Man 2. One of the messier Marvel films in terms of like plotting, structure, just overall cohesion. But Thor's hammer at the end was a big teaser just because it was before the first Avengers film. So they were just like setting up the next big character franchise. I think of all the Avengers characters that they've done solo films for, Hulk and Thor have been really hard sells for Marvel. They've just never been quite as popular as Iron Man or Captain America. You have to remember that Captain America hadn't come out yet, so this was like the next big Avenger. So this was a huge deal. And it was a really funny Coulson moment. I know everyone's wondering when he's going to show up in the movies again. I'll talk about that a little bit more during Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when we get closer to Age of Ultron. On to number 8, Howard the Duck at the end of Guardians. This was just one of those pure fun moments because we got Cosmo the dog, we got a broken Adam Warlock cocoon, and we have Howard the Duck, who a lot of people had forgotten was a Marvel character. So it was just James Gunn having a lot of fun. Like, this isn't meant to mean anything, it's just supposed to be funny. Enjoy it. Originally, this was supposed to be Stan Lee in the case, but they ended up changing it the last minute. Stan Lee, mint condition, fresh in his packaging. On to number 7, another Guardians moment, Dancing Baby Groot. Another just pure fun moment on the part of James Gunn, but this is actually more relevant to the plot line. Groot will come back, although the funny thing is that James Gunn teased that it might be a different Groot, like this might be Son of Groot. In the comics, that's not the way it works. Groot can just regenerate himself. On to number 6, shawarma at the end of the first Avengers film. This is like the scene I think Joss Whedon was talking about when he said that he's not going to do another post-credit scene in Age of Ultron. Something he said at Comic-Con last year, I think, when one of the actors like Robert Downey Jr. or Chris Evans or someone asked him, hey Joss, how are we going to beat, that fun scene from the last film, that shawarma scene? And Joss Whedon said, sometimes the only way to win is to not play the game. That kind of makes me think of War Games with Matthew Broderick. But really what Joss Whedon meant is that like they're just not going to try and keep topping themselves because it can't be done. Like a lot of the magic of this shawarma scene is that it was so unexpected. And now that everyone's expecting that from Marvel, it's just you don't get the same payoff. Moving on to number 5, the collector's warehouse at the end of Thor: The Dark World. This is actually really important because 1, it continues setting up the idea of the Infinity Gems, or Infinity Stones if you go by the movie saying. The scene is also the first time we see Adam Warlock's Cocoon, which is like, huge character from the Marvel canon, very closely tied with Thanos. So it's like, if they're going to do Thanos Infinity Gauntlet, it also helps if Adam Warlock exists in this universe, just because he's heavily featured in stories with the Infinity Gauntlet. I know a lot of people are wondering about Phase 3, Adam Warlock, and the Soul Gem, because in the comics, Adam Warlock is tied directly to the Soul Gem, and it kind of looks like this is the Soul Gem in Vision's forehead here, as opposed to the Solar Gem that he has in the comics. So the movies might be changing that, we don't know yet. Just keep a tab open in Chrome. We'll have to wait till the movie comes out to find out for sure. I know a lot of people are wondering why the movies changed the Infinity Gems, and like why like we have the Aether, we have the Tesseract, like Infinity Gems in different forms. I think it's really just to make it more visually interesting. And I think initially, whenever Marvel was first doing this, Thanos was an idea in their head, Thanos Infinity Gauntlet. But if any of the films along the way ended up being unsuccessful, I think Marvel wanted like a side plan. Obviously it did pay off, so now they're like, okay, these are all Infinity Stones, here we go. On to number 4, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch at the end of Winter Soldier. Nothing is more horrifying than a miracle. That was one of the greatest lines ever. Regardless of how awesome Baron von Strucker ends up being, what he's doing is very important. And I know there's some controversy as to whether Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are going to be called Inhumans or if they're going to be called something else because their powers derive from the Mind Gem. Even if Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch aren't Inhumans, I do believe that the movie will invoke the idea of Inhumans. On to number 3, Nick Fury, Dr. Selvig, and Loki look at the Tesseract at the end of the first Thor film. This was really big because it was a teaser for Avengers, which was still a long way off. We still had Captain America coming. And think about how many films the Tesseract was actually featured in. And it confirmed that Loki was not dead, although he looked like he'd been to hell and back. And when I say hell, I mean Thanos' domain in Sanctuary. On to number 2, Nick Fury explains the Avengers initiative at the end of the first Iron Man film. This was the beginning of it all, and Jon Favreau tells a really funny story about how he got Samuel L. Jackson to do the cameo and how secretive they were about it. He said that he had a black limo like literally drive from the street into the soundstage to try and keep it a secret, but people still found out. They were like, oh hey, it's Nick Fury, they're teasing Avengers. This was in 2008, so if you think like leaks from the set, like people taking pictures, spoilers from the set are bad now, think about how hard people worked to find this out back in 2008. And at the time, they had no idea what Samuel L. Jackson was going to mean inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They knew he was playing Nick Fury, but like his role in all the other films hadn't really been determined yet. It was just meant to be like this fun one-off thing for the fans. Of course, all the other films ended up being hugely successful, so that they weaved Nick Fury in a much bigger way as they went, along with Phil Coulson. And finally, my number 1 Marvel post-credits scene, Thanos at the end of the first Avengers film. This put the universe in Marvel Cinematic Universe. Even if you haven't read any of the Infinity Gauntlet storylines or any stories with Thanos in it, you know that this is a huge deal. He is the biggest big bad of the Marvel Universe. As of right now, there's a lot of rumors as to like which other films he's going to appear in before Infinity War. I would expect him to at least appear in Guardians of the Galaxy because that's the only space-based franchise that we have right now inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not going to hold my breath for Age of Ultron, but it is also possible he could have like a brief cameo in it. What I'm expecting from him is that Josh Brolin's performance, his mocap performance, will evolve as the films develop, just because technology will get a little bit better and we'll have more time with him. Josh Brolin will have more time to spend with the character. When he appeared in Guardians of the Galaxy, it was really just a single day with a bunch of mocap dots on his face. He wasn't even on screen for that long, so the next time he appears, it'll probably be in a much bigger way. So here's my big question for you guys. What is your favorite Marvel post-credit scene? And actually, which one do you think is the worst? I would say, maybe Incredible Hulk, just because it was kind of a throwaway line. Like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe hadn't really come together at that point yet. In related news, this is actually a really big week because Daredevil is dropping all 13 episodes on Friday. I'm going to do as many vids as possible, probably like one video for every 2 episodes of Daredevil, so be sure to subscribe to get everything. HBO is also dropping Game of Thrones this Sunday, and I always do a bunch of videos for that, so if you guys haven't started watching Game of Thrones, you can get HBO now for $15 a month and stream everything for free for 30 days. Like, they have a 30-day trial if you sign up right now. So lots of Daredevil coming and lots of Game of Thrones. And I will be doing my weekly Game of Thrones giveaways. Just to get you guys psyched up for Daredevil, you can click here for my non-spoilery review of the first 2 episodes, and you can click here for some big updates on Avengers 3. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. I'll see you guys tonight.